Once upon a time, there was a girl named Carol, and she had a clown doll named Bubbles, and together they ruled BBC television for decades. Many of you know exactly what I'm talking about now, even if you don't know the names for them. I'm talking about this test card used by the BBC, formerly known as Test Card F, known to many Brits as That Girl with the Clown Doll. It's known to Americans as nothing because we have no idea what you're talking about, but we do have our own version of test cards to talk about. Now, test cards, also called test patterns, are a television test signal used before the days of 24/7 programming and digital TV. It was broadcast when the transmitter was active, but there was no program being broadcast. The actual purpose wasn't just to fill the airspace, but to help internal engineers make sure everything was running smoothly from the studios and to help television users at home troubleshoot their televisions and signals. If you had the TV guy over to fix your TV because something was wrong, but there isn't anything currently being broadcast, you're gonna have a hard time trying to fix a blank screen. So this combination of shapes and images and lines and sound and eventually colors could help you test basically everything you need to test to make sure that things were working properly. Today, test cards are rarely seen outside of television studios and post-production facilities, and they're no longer intended to help viewers calibrate their television sets, but to circle back to where we started, the most famous one in the UK is the BBC Girl with the Clown Doll. In this episode on the Girl Gone London channel, we're going to compare UK and USA test cards, as well as talk about the history of each and the interesting differences in design. On the list of topics that you didn't realize you needed to know, I feel like this is definitely towards the top of the list. So let's get started. We're going to take a look at the era before color TV first and foremost, because Girl with the Clown Doll, or Test Card F, is from the color TV era, but TV is older than that. Back in the very early days of BBC test cards, the very first test cards was simply a tuning signal that looked like this, broadcast in 1934. Test card A comes along in the late 1930s, but then you have test card C in 1947, the first one to actually resemble the eventual test card F. You can see that it is a combination of shapes and lines, and it was used in the UK and many Commonwealth countries up until the end of black and white TV. There were some modifications after that, but before we move on to color TV, let's hop over to the USA. One of the most popular black and white test cards in the US is called the RCA Indian Head Test Pattern, featuring a drawing of a Native American at the top, as well as graphic elements surrounding it. It was introduced in 1939 and was used up until the rise of color television in the 1960s. Like the BBC ones, each element on this card was specifically designed to match a technical element of a television broadcast, so engineers could identify problems easily and kind of at a glance once they got really good at it. If you are a super geek on this topic, you can find the charts showing you exactly which part of the test card helped test which part of the broadcast. Interestingly, this test pattern was such a symbol of early television in the USA that many US television stations chose this image to be their final image broadcast when the analog signals signed off for the final time in 2009 when the USA transitioned to digital TV. Before we move on, I do need to mention that at the time of original airing, attitudes in the US towards Native Americans was often one of stereotypes. This depiction of a Native American with a headdress is thought to be chosen because the headdress allowed for the engineers to fit in the 10 shades of gray in a black and white TV. But it should be noted that Native Americans have a history of being persecuted within the US and worse, and you'll find many viewpoints online about the appropriateness of this stereotypical image. This video is not about that, just something to add to the discussion. Now let's jump back over to the UK, the day after color television was available to the public on BBC Two. They introduced a test card known as Test Card F. This funky image of bunch of colors, lines, and shapes, and yes, a girl in a red shirt playing noughts and crosses, or tic-tac-toe as we call it in the USA, along with her clown doll. You wouldn't have known just by looking at it because it's not displayed on the test card, but her name is Carol and his name is Bubbles, and as I said, together they ruled the BBC test card kingdom for more than 4 decades. The test card was developed by a BBC engineer named George. How did he know Carol to get her involved in this test card? Well, he was her dad. Again, each portion of the card has a role in helping engineers determine if things are working properly. For example, the blocks of color on the side would look strange if the sync circuits were not adjusted properly, the lines allowed them to check the tunings, the brightness and the contrast settings could be checked with the grayscale shapes, and the colors of the clown were helpful. A common transmission error called luminance delay inequality turned the clown's yellow buttons to white. Originally, Bubbles the Clown was actually different colors, he was blue and white, but BBC engineers decided that green was needed, so he got his green clothes, and in later test card versions featuring very similar imaging, they zoom out a little bit so you can see that he's holding a piece of chalk. Test card F was also used in other countries, including briefly in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, some places in Australia, and New Zealand. Test card F has also had cultural significance in the UK, being parodied in everything from music videos, promotional materials, and other shows, like the Animaniacs, where they put the characters in the same position as Carol and Bubbles, and even RuPaul's Drag Race UK, where a contestant wore a runway look inspired by Test card F. Following Test card F, you had Test card J, which was basically the same thing, but an updated version with a few changes. They included a new green square at the top of the screen, a rescanned image for improved color accuracy, and a realignment of the central image to make it so that the cross on the Noughts and Crosses board was now the exact center of the screen, or it should be if things were working correctly. Test card W was the widescreen version of Test card F and first appeared in 1999. The BBC also had another color test card, this one, which is based on a modified Philips PM5544 test pattern, and Channel 4 used this design, which got no love from the public because it wasn't very aesthetically pleasing. If you're in the UK, I should also let you know that you can join the Test Card Circle, a membership of about 200 people within the UK who share an interest in the test card transmissions and music played during the test cards. There is a regular magazine as well as a yearly convention featuring an entire weekend of nostalgia. They are living proof that no matter what your specific interest is in, you're bound to find other people to share it with. Interestingly, when color TV hits America, it seems that Americans got less creative instead of more. The most common test pattern in the US related to color television is what is known as the SMPTE color bars. They are what they say, a bunch of bars of different colors. There are variations, but it essentially pairs a bunch of color combinations together at different intensities. It's obviously much more complex than it looks to the general public. Much thought has gone into the exact colors, bars, and combinations, but this is what has remained consistent in the US as the most prominent test pattern of the color television era. Unfortunately, its creators, Norbert Larkey and David Holmes, definitely didn't get the recognition they deserve. It's not quite a girl with a clown doll, but it is iconic. To finish, UK television history lovers can join me on a trip down some of the used and unused UK test cards over the years. For instance, here's some that never aired, but were only used internally at the BBC. There's this one, Test Card H, back in the days of black and white TV. Then there's an early variant of Test Card F, again, never broadcast, but also featuring a little girl. A bit too much of a close-up. I would say this girl looks like she's got something to hide. Then you actually have this fully grown woman acting as a test card, which seems more like a scene out of Baywatch than a test card, but okay. Then you have some test cards that were only broadcast briefly, like this one. Only shown on June 21st and October 5th of 1997 on BBC Two. There was also a comic relief test card used on BBC One on March 18th, 1993, and the Teletubbies even had their own test card used in and around the BBC Television Centre, but not broadcast to the public. So there you have it, a brief history of test patterns in the UK and America. I hope you learned a little something or at least got to stroll down memory lane with me. As always, leave your comments down below. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.